Senator Cynthia Lummis, who's a Wyoming Republican well known for her support of the cryptocurrency industry, has introduced a new crypto bill for the United States and brought this with her to Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, where she spoke to 8,500 people just after Trump had spoken. And this new proposed legislation is a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the United States. But what is this exactly, and what are the potential positives and negatives of it? That's what we'll be looking at in this video. So please do like this video and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to offer more content for you in future. You can contact me if you're looking for crypto coaching. You can sign up for a free account with Coinly using the link in the description to this video, which is one of the best automated crypto tax platforms out there. If you're looking for more specific tax advice based on your personal circumstances, I've partnered with a leading crypto tax company in Miner, and I'll leave a link to contact them directly in the description to this video. And finally, I've included a link to Trezor's website in the description for anyone looking for one of the best hardware wallets or cold storage that's out there, with two new models released recently in the Trezor Safe 3 and Trezor Safe 5. Just a reminder that I will soon be changing the name of this channel that I covered in a previous video that you can find a link to here and in the description. And obviously nothing contained here is financial advice. So let's jump straight in and take a look at this strategic Bitcoin reserve. The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Bill is proposed legislation for the US government to accumulate 1 million Bitcoin and hold this as a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the United States, managed by the US Treasury. The plans include purchasing up to 200,000 BTC per year over the next 5 years until they reach that million, and that it would be partly financed by the US Treasury taking in the Federal Reserve's gold certificates, revaluing them, and then issuing new gold certificates back to the Fed. And you can see here from the Federal Reserve's website that the gold certificates that it holds are valued at $42 per ounce, at a value of about $11 billion, with roughly $600 million worth of gold held in custody by the Federal Reserve banks, and most of it, so $10.4 billion worth of gold, held for the Treasury by the US Mint. So the gold certificates that it holds are valued at $42 per ounce, whereas the current market price of gold is around $2,468 per ounce. So you can see the large difference here and their plans. But these large Bitcoin purchases for the reserve would also be funded by using any surplus that existed in future years for the Federal Reserve and for the Treasury. Also, this strategic Bitcoin reserve is a longer term reserve because the bill states that this Bitcoin would be held for at least 20 years, that it could only be disposed of for paying off federal debt, and that no more than 10% of the assets could be sold in any 2-year period. I'll include a link to the draft of this 13-page bill that Cynthia Lummis released in the description to the video, should you want to check this out yourself. And this strategic Bitcoin reserve bill has been formally introduced now, as you can see here, but there's no text yet on the Congress website, and it'd need to be passed in the Senate, the House, and by whoever the president is to become law. So we're certainly at an initial stage for this. Trump supported the bill and Bitcoin in general at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville when he spoke at the end of July, and Dennis Porter, who's the CEO of the Satoshi Action Fund, put out a post on X stating that nearly 3,000 letters of support have already been sent to US senators as of August the 5th, urging them to support this new strategic Bitcoin reserve bill. And you can see here the makeup of these by Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And if you are based in the US, Satoshi Action Fund are supporting this bill and have a section on their website where you can email your local senator to ask them to support the bill as well. And I'll include a link to this in the description of this video if you'd like to do this or simply check it out. So what would be some of the advantages of having a strategic Bitcoin reserve? Well, firstly, it would ensure more diversification of assets for the US, provide an alternative to traditional financial instruments, reduce its dependency on depreciating fiat currencies, and therefore represent a store of value in the long term. It would also potentially help the US to counter efforts by other countries to circumnavigate the dollar's dominance, e.g. BRICS, and would help to maintain it as an economic leader globally. The US would be clear in its aim to become a leader in the digital asset and crypto space, and it would attract investment, businesses, innovation, and create new opportunities for the United States. It might very well also pave the way for other countries to do the same, which would create huge demand for Bitcoin worldwide, and which would obviously be incredibly bullish for BTC's price. Hence, why most people who hold Bitcoin are supportive of this, like Michael Saylor, for example. But these advocates of Bitcoin are looking at its fundamentals and properties as a scarce asset with a decentralized blockchain and long-term store of value. And given these benefits, it makes sense for a nation to want to hold it. And we're seeing now large institutional adoption and accumulation of Bitcoin anyway. So if you hold it longer term, which the strategic Bitcoin reserve proposes, then that is likely to be positive for the US, for the demand of BTC, and therefore extremely bullish for its price also. It would also help with the US regulation of Bitcoin and its perceived attitude towards the cryptocurrency industry as a whole, because the US would be invested in it and therefore become pro-Bitcoin to a certain extent. However, there are some people that think this wouldn't be a good idea. A few of the kind of headlines that you can see here. So let's explore some of the arguments against it. And firstly, would this actually be positive for the US economy as a whole? Because one argument is that a massive amount of liquidity would need to be pumped into the markets to fund the purchase of this Bitcoin. And this would be done by the US Treasury through the Federal Reserve by revaluing its gold certificates that I mentioned earlier. And this liquidity would likely end up again as interest payments through the reverse repo, treasury bills, or bank reserves, etc., which would increase inflation and further increase the US deficit. So basically just exacerbating the problem. However, this argument doesn't take into account the increase in the dollar value of Bitcoin during this time, and therefore the rise in this strategic Bitcoin reserve that both Lummis and Trump talked about, because it would certainly have the effect of increasing the price of Bitcoin even further, which is great for those in the crypto space, including US holders of it, and would likely still outperform most other major asset classes or investment avenues. As you can see here in a table containing some of these by iShares, looking back each year since 2014, with SPX here being the S&P 500, for anyone that didn't know. HY is the S&P US High Yield Corporate Bond Index. EM is the Dow Jones Emerging Markets Index. AGG is the S&P US Aggregate Bond Index. And CMT is the Dow Jones Commodity Index. Another potential disadvantage of a Bitcoin reserve that's been mentioned would be in the nature of what a reserve is. So if the US went to war, for example, or there was another black swan event that massively impacted markets, the price of BTC might end up being so low that the US couldn't realistically dip into this reserve if needed, with stockpiling more commodities like oil and gas being seen as more useful in a practical sense. Most of this reserve would be coming through the revaluation of gold certificates though, rather than necessarily existing money. And it would be a longer term investment, as is stated in the draft bill, with them DCAing in for 5 years and holding the BTC for 20 years. So it depends if the US would be willing to hold for that long, as individual investors have to decide when they buy Bitcoin. And with that in mind, the argument of Bitcoin being too volatile to hold in a reserve doesn't by itself make much sense. When you look at the volatility of the price of oil, for example, as you can see here, that the US has a large reserve of, with this having seen a decline in the past few years, but with a small increase in 2024 so far. But regardless of this, the United States is holding that oil in reserve for a reason. And the reason for holding Bitcoin would be as a long-term store of value and to take advantage of its large price appreciation. But finally, if you're a crypto investor, Perhaps the biggest downside of this US strategic Bitcoin reserve is having the largest economy in the world potentially owning about 5% of the total amount of Bitcoin that can exist. So 1 million out of a max supply of 21 million BTC. So there would be obvious concerns over centralization, market manipulation, and really going against what Bitcoin should stand for, given that the US holds just over 213,000 Bitcoin currently. So this would be nearly 5 times more than it currently holds. And this would make the US the largest holder of Bitcoin by far if everything else stayed the same. And if something happened with Bitcoin that the US didn't agree with, it could use its geopolitical or economic power to try to change that, which would certainly not be good. And as a slight side point, if this did pay off for the US over the next decade or two, and you live in a country that didn't do this and adopt Bitcoin in some way, then you might end up seeing more US dominance and it's strengthening against these currencies and economies. The other side to this section, as a final point, so I don't end the video on just the negatives, is that the US would be recognizing Bitcoin if this law is passed. And this could lead to a rush and a mass demand for Bitcoin worldwide, which would obviously have a large positive impact on its price. But that ends this video looking at the United States Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. And as always, I'd love to know what you think about it in the comments below. And if you're interested in more of a tailored approach to your crypto education, and you think you'd benefit from having someone look over your shoulder and guide you on your journey, I do offer one-to-one coaching to those who have the desire and the means to educate themselves further. And there are links in the description where you can message me and book in a free video call to see if we'd be a good fit. There are also links to Coinly, Trezor, and to contact Miner in the description of this video also, as I mentioned at the start of the video. And if you found this content interesting, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it really does help. And have a great day.